King Charles finally puts his foot down. He will not be reconciling with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle after making a major announcement regarding his cancer improvement.
This morning, the British Parliament did something it hasn't done in over 300 years in action so constitutionally explosive that even the Speaker's hands trembled as he announced the result at 11:43 a.m. Westminster crossed a line that changed everything. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been formally exiled from Britain, and the shockwaves are only beginning. What makes this even more astonishing is that it wasn't a sudden decision. It was calculated, deliberate, and planned in absolute secrecy for months. How did we get here? What happened behind closed doors? And more importantly, what happens next? The vote that shattered everything took place in the House of Commons, a chamber usually rowdy, combative, and filled with theatrical arguments. But today was different. Silence fell over the members of Parliament, who sat frozen, not debating or jeering, just waiting. The Speaker of the House, typically steady and authoritative, trembled slightly as he read the numbers that would change royal history forever. 347 votes in favor, 216 against. The motion to formally exile Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had passed, marking a moment that will be remembered in British history for generations. Nothing moved at first, and then the chamber erupted not with cheers or celebration, but with something far more unsettling, a low murmur spreading like wildfire through the benches, a collective exhale of disbelief mixed with grim sanction. Imagine being in that room, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Outside, in the cold December air, reporters stationed at Westminster since dawn were shouting into their phones. And within 90 seconds, every major news outlet on the planet had broken into regular programming. For years, American commentators had suggested Britain was too polite, too bound by tradition to take drastic action, but today proved them catastrophically wrong. What made this vote so devastating wasn't just the outcome, it was the speed. The motion had been introduced only 6 days earlier, debated behind closed doors for 72 hours, and brought to the floor with almost no public warning of violation of nearly every parliamentary convention. Exile motions, when they existed at all in modern history, usually took months of deliberation, but this one moved like a guillotine, swift, efficient, and final. Why the rush? What were they afraid of? Meanwhile, the royal family's absence was striking. King Charles was attending a private engagement in Scotland, Prince William was at Windsor with a carefully cleared schedule, and Princess Anne was in Edinburgh. This choreographed absence spoke louder than any statement, ensuring plausible deniability and signaling strategy rather than coincidence. The vote had occurred with a quiet knowledge and tacit endorsement of the monarchy, and the reactions from those who had pushed hardest for the motion's senior Conservative MPs representing constituencies where public anger toward the Sussexes had grown toxic were telling. Quiet relief rather than triumph. One anonymous backbencher explained, "This wasn't about punishment. It was about survival." The monarchy cannot function while two of its former members wage war from abroad, a phrase that dominated headlines for the day. But where were Harry and Meghan when their world collapsed? Across the Atlantic, in Montecito, California, they were waking up to a reality that would change their lives forever. The Sussexes woke to a nightmare they had been warned about but refused to believe possible. According to sources close to their circle, Meghan saw the alert first while checking her phone at breakfast, the breaking news banner flashing across the screen. For several seconds, she simply stared, then handed the phone to Harry without a word. The silence wasn't because the vote was surprising, it was because it was real, irreversible, and final. In that moment, everything they had built, everything they assumed would always be theirs, vanished in an instant. The legal consequences hit like a freight train. Both Harry and Meghan would be prohibited from entering the United Kingdom for a minimum of 10 years, with potential extensions subject to parliamentary review. Any attempt to return would result in immediate arrest and deportation. Their British properties, including Frogmore Cottage, would be seized by the Crown Estate. Their remaining ceremonial titles, already stripped of function, would be formally nullified. Even their children, Archie and Lilibet, would face restrictions on travel to Britain until they reached adulthood and could petition independently grandchildren of King Charles and great-grandchildren of Queen Elizabeth, barred from the country that defines their heritage. By noon, Buckingham Palace released a statement so brief it felt almost cruel. The matter is one for Parliament and the government. The royal family would not comment further, leaving the Sussexes to absorb the full weight of history in silence. The royal family would continue to focus on its duties. 21 words. That was all they felt Harry deserved. But the bigger question remained. How did it all come to this? The first signs of something unprecedented emerged in early November, when a small group of MPs received invitations to a private briefing at the Cabinet Office. Logged officially as a security consultation, the description was vague enough to avoid media attention. Attendees included senior members of the Home Affairs Committee, representatives from intelligence services, and constitutional advisors specializing in the complex intersection of monarchy and state power. What they were shown that evening changed everything. Intelligence reports compiled over the previous 8 months revealed a troubling pattern. Coordinated media campaigns aimed at undermining specific royal family members, particularly Catherine. Financial ties between Sussex-affiliated PR firms and outlets known for spreading misinformation, and communications suggesting that Harry and Meghan's team had been in contact with foreign media organizations to discuss documentary projects that could destabilize the monarchy from abroad. While none of this was illegal in the traditional sense, for a nation where the monarchy functions as a constitutional cornerstone, the implications were severe. One MP later described the atmosphere as funeral-like. "We weren't dealing with tabloid drama anymore," he said off the record. "We were looking at something that could fracture the relationship between Crown and Parliament if left unchecked." This wasn't about hurt feelings or family squabbles, it was about national security. 3 weeks later, a second meeting took place at a secure Westminster location, now including senior figures from both major parties. Stop and think. When was the last time British politicians from different parties agreed on anything? Yet here, they were united, facing a crisis that transcended politics, tradition, and personal loyalty. The Sussex situation had transcended regular political divisions. This was now a constitutional threat. Enter Prince William, his role invisible but decisive. Though he never attended meetings or lobbied MPs directly, his private secretary delivered briefings to key parliamentary figures, clearly outlining the palace's concerns and signaling that the royal family would not oppose a legislative solution. Without that subtle but critical endorsement, Parliament would never have dared to act. Think about what William did. He gave permission for his own brother, the person he grew up with and shared grief with after their mother's death, to be exiled. Princess and contributed in her own way. At a private dinner with senior cabinet ministers in late November, she made a remark described by one attendee as chillingly clear. Institutions survive by knowing when to amputate. She didn't elaborate, yet everyone understood she was referring to Harry and Meghan, quietly endorsing the most extreme course. The real turning point came in early December, when a subcommittee investigating foreign influence operations released a report. Buried almost as a footnote was mention of British nationals engaged in media activities that could be interpreted as destabilizing the constitutional framework. Solidifying the urgency of decisive action, the report didn't name Harry and Meghan explicitly, but it landed on the British Home Secretary's desk within hours and changed the calculation entirely. What had once been viewed as a domestic royal drama was now entangled with international relations and national security concerns. When foreign governments start questioning whether former royals are acting in ways that complicate diplomacy, the situation moves beyond tabloid fodder into territory demanding governmental response. In absolute secrecy, a small team of parliamentary lawyers collaborated with constitutional historians to draft the exile motion, relying on a precedent from 1703, the last time Parliament formally banished individuals deemed threats to the realm's stability. The mechanism had never been used against royals, but in Britain's unwritten constitution, mere existence is often enough. By the first week of December, the motion was ready, but the decision to compress months of procedure into days was strategic. Delay risked leaks, media firestorms, and outside interference. Speed wasn't cruelty, it was survival. The final signal that the vote was inevitable came when King Charles authorized the selective release of private correspondence between himself and Harry, messages spanning 18 months that showed repeated warnings about the consequences of public attacks on the family. Orchestrated through carefully chosen journalists, the release dramatically shifted public sentiment. Polls in the 48 hours before the vote showed overwhelming support for decisive parliamentary action among older voters and even 42% support among younger demographics previously sympathetic to the Sussexes. By the morning of the vote, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Only the margin remained. Throughout late autumn, the Sussex household had operated under the belief that their position was secure. Meghan, in particular, had confidence that American public opinion would shield them from consequences, building a narrative over 3 years portraying them as victims of an archaic, racist institution, a narrative that resonated with younger Americans, progressive media outlets, and social justice advocates. What she failed to account for, however, was that narratives, no matter how compelling, eventually collide with reality. Harry's position was more complicated. Unlike Meghan, he had grown up inside the system and understood its mechanisms, pressures, and capacity for coldness. Harry had always understood the pressures of royalty, but somewhere along the way that understanding had curdled into contempt. Friends who knew him before his marriage described a man who chafed against royal constraints but never truly believed the institution could turn on him. Born royal, he assumed that granted him permanent immunity. He was catastrophically wrong. The first warning came in October, when several key media allies and Britain journalists who had previously championed the couple, written sympathetic profiles, and defended them against criticism began quietly stepping back from Sussex coverage. One by one, they declined interview requests, pulled back from stories, and privately expressed concern that the narrative had become too toxic to touch. Speaking months later under anonymity, one journalist explained the shift. "We started hearing things from inside Parliament. Not rumors, but concrete information that something significant was being discussed. As reporters who value access, we had to make calculations." Continuing to champion Harry and Meghan risked relationships with sources inside government and the palace. For many of us, that trade-off no longer made sense. The rats were leaving the ship, but Harry and Meghan didn't notice. The second warning arrived in early November in the form of legal communications. Harry's British legal team received a formal notice from the Home Office requesting clarification on his residency status, security arrangements, and ongoing litigation against UK media outlets. The language was bureaucratic, almost mundane, but the subtext was clear: the government was reviewing his standing, and this review was not routine. How did Harry respond? He instructed his lawyers to push back aggressively, treating the inquiry as yet another example of institutional harassment. Meghan encouraged the approach, seeing any sign of retreat as validation of the palace's tactics. What neither of them realized was that these warnings were only the beginning. What Harry and Meghan didn't understand was that the Home Office inquiry wasn't harassment, it was preparation. The government was laying the groundwork for actions that would require detailed legal justification, and Harry's combative responses only made the eventual outcome easier to defend. The third warning should have been impossible to miss. In late November, William authorized a rare interview with a senior political correspondent. Ostensibly about his increased royal duties, the interview included a single line that went largely unnoticed by the public but sent shockwaves among those who understood royal communication. There comes a point when protecting the institution requires difficult decisions that previous generations avoided. He didn't mention Harry, he didn't need to. Everyone understood what he meant. Yet in California, the reaction was dismissal. Meghan told friends William was posturing for a British public losing faith in the monarchy, while Harry interpreted it as proof of his brother's ambition and willingness to sacrifice family for power. Neither considered that William wasn't threatening, he was informed. The decision had already been made. The gears were already turning. In late November, a back-channel communication offered the Sussexes one final chance. Stop attacking, issue a statement committing to silence on royal matters, give Parliament a reason not to act. Their response, delivered through their PR team, was defiant. They would not be silenced, would not apologize, and would not negotiate with a system designed to suppress them. The intermediary reportedly closed the channel, telling associates, "They have no idea what's coming." Hubris defined their position, being offered a last chance to save themselves and responding with defiance. On the morning of December 3rd, as MPs filed into Westminster to vote, Harry and Meghan were in California, assuming this was merely another chapter in an ongoing drama. When the vote passed, the shock was absolute, not because they hadn't known emotion existed, but because they had convinced themselves it would fail. They believed Britain, for all its bluster, would never actually exile a prince and his American wife, that the international embarrassment would be too great, and that Charles, despite everything, would intervene. They were wrong on every count. What happened in Westminster on December 3rd was not mere political theater, it was a constitutional earthquake. The vote to exile Harry and Meghan activated mechanisms long assumed relegated to history books, dusted off from centuries past, and applied to two individuals who had crossed a line no modern royal had dared approach. The legal foundation rests on a peculiar feature of British constitutional law. Unlike nations with written constitutions, Britain operates on parliamentary sovereignty combined with centuries of precedent. In theory, Parliament can pass almost any law it chooses, provided it has the votes. The statute invoked, originally designed to address threats during periods of political instability, granted Parliament authority to banish individuals whose actions were deemed incompatible with national security and constitutional stability. Modern interpretation had assumed such powers defunct, overridden by contemporary human rights frameworks. The December vote proved otherwise. Within 6 hours, the Home Office dispatched formal 47-page notices to Harry and Meghan through their legal representatives, outlining the terms of exile, Entry to the United Kingdom was prohibited for at least 10 years, with any attempt resulting in immediate detention and forcible removal. Their British passports, while technically valid, were flagged in international databases, alerting immigration officials worldwide. Property seizure followed with equal efficiency. Frogmore Cottage was reclaimed by the Crown Estate before sunset, personal belongings catalogued and stored, pending arrangements for international shipping. Security provisions were terminated immediately, and intelligence sharing between British and American security services regarding threats to the Sussexes was suspended. Imagine waking up one morning with full royal security and by sunset finding yourself completely on your own. Inside Buckingham Palace, the hours following the parliamentary vote unfolded with a stillness that felt almost calculated, a cold silence that spoke louder than any statement could. The response inside Buckingham Palace was almost rehearsed. There were no emergency meetings, no frantic phone calls, no visible crisis management staff moved with the precision of those prepared for this outcome long before it arrived. In the private apartments of the senior royals, the reaction was not shock but something far more unsettling: relief. King Charles remained in Scotland throughout the day, attending a planned visit to a Highland community project, speaking briefly with local officials, and returning to Balmoral by late afternoon. Observers noted no visible distress, no hesitation. His face carried the composed exhaustion he had worn for months. If he grieved for his son, he did so behind closed doors. Charles's silence was deliberate, crafted with advisors who understood that any public emotion would be weaponized. Sorrow would be seen as weakness, relief as cruelty, so he said nothing. William's response was similarly cold and measured. He spent the day at Windsor adjusting his schedule to take on additional engagements now falling to him. When a private secretary informed him of the final vote tally, he reportedly nodded once, said nothing, and returned to the documents he had been reviewing. For him, the exile was not a family tragedy, it was a problem solved. Princess Anne spent the day in Edinburgh attending her royal duties with relentless efficiency. When asked how she felt about the parliamentary decision, she reportedly replied, "Institutions endure by making hard choices. Today, Parliament made one." She elaborated no further, but the message was unmistakable. The exile was a necessity, not punishment. Buckingham Palace released a 29-word statement at 2:30 p.m. Remarkable only for its brevity, the matter decided by Parliament today is a constitutional question outside the scope of royal commentary. The family's focus remains on service to the nation. No mention of Harry by name, no expression of regret or support, just a clinical acknowledgement that the situation had been removed from the family's domain and placed in the hands of the state. Behind that silence, private calculations were already underway. Charles's advisors reviewed protocols for future succession planning to prevent legal ambiguities, while William's team coordinated with government officials on messaging and public perception. Across the royal household, staff prepared for the inevitable backlash from Sussex supporters, who would portray the exile as proof of institutional cruelty. International reactions complicated the silence. American media, particularly outlets sympathetic to the Sussexes, depicted the royal family as complicit in a medieval punishment. CNN ran segments questioning whether the British monarchy had a place in a modern democracy, while the New York Times published an op-ed arguing the exile revealed the institution's inherent toxicity. For the palace, these attacks were expected and anticipated. The strategy was simple: let the noise rage, offer no defense, and allow time to dull outrage. Yet within this orchestrated silence, small cracks appeared. King Charles, during a private evening at Balmoral, was observed standing alone at a window overlooking the estate grounds. His expression unreadable, perhaps thinking of Harry as a child or wondering if any of this could have been prevented. Prince William, too, showed fleeting moments of something beneath his composed exterior. During a private conversation with Catherine, overheard accidentally by a staff member, he reportedly said, "I didn't want it to come to this. But he left us no choice." It was the closest he came to expressing ambivalence. Yet even then, the emphasis was on necessity, not regret. Meanwhile, as the winter sun set over Montecito on December 3rd, Harry and Meghan faced a future more uncertain than any moment since their departure from royal life. The exile vote had not simply closed a door, it had sealed an entire corridor of possibilities they had assumed would always remain open. No matter how hostile the relationship became, they had believed that return was always an option. That belief died at 11:43 that morning in Westminster. The immediate practical consequences were staggering. Travel became complicated in ways they hadn't anticipated, Harry's flagged status creating constant alerts and bureaucratic obstacles around the globe. The exile meant that every international border crossing would now involve additional scrutiny. Countries with extradition agreements or close intelligence cooperation with Britain might view Harry as a security complication. Financial pressures, already significant, intensified. The couple's income model had relied heavily on their royal connection, their ability to tell insider stories, their positioning as truth-tellers exposing institutional dysfunction. Exile changed the narrative. They were no longer brave whistleblowers but exiled former royals, a category that historically generates more pity than profit. Media partners like Netflix and Spotify would need to reassess whether the Sussex brand still carried commercial value. The implications stretched across decades. Both held dual citizenship, but the exile order, while not legally binding on them, created a chilling effect. Would they ever be welcomed in Britain as adults? Could they build relationships with cousins, grandparents, and extended family they had known as children? The psychological impact would reveal itself slowly, yet trauma experts recognized the signs immediately. Harry, defined by his royal identity even in rebellion, faced the existential question. Without Britain, the palace, and the institution he had spent years attacking, who was he? Meghan's position was different but equally complex. Entering the royal family as an outsider, enduring treatment she described as racist and cruel, and building a second act around exposing that treatment, she now faced exile. In some circles, it could be framed as vindication, but exile also meant failure and inability to navigate a system others had survived. Hollywood, where success matters more than righteousness, rarely forgives failure. Internationally, the United States faced quiet pressure from British diplomats to limit Sussex activities that could be interpreted as hostile to an allied nation. Soft power has limits, even for American citizens married to exiled princes. Yet one possibility remained, not as royals, not as victims, but as something entirely new. History shows that some public figures survive exile and build meaningful second acts, but success requires the ability to stop looking backward. Could Harry and Meghan reinvent themselves? Could they find purpose beyond grievances? Or would they spend the next decade locked in a battle they could never win? For the British monarchy, long-term implications were equally uncertain. The exile solved an immediate problem. Harry and Meghan could no longer destabilize the institution from within. But it created new vulnerabilities. International criticism was fierce, and younger generations outside Britain viewed the decision as proof the monarchy was outdated and vindictive. Prince William, now the unambiguous heir, faced pressure not only to prove his own merit but also to justify the coldness shown toward his brother. Every decision, appearance, and statement would be scrutinized through the lens of that severed relationship. The crown had chosen survival over compassion, and whether that choice ultimately strengthens or weakens the monarchy remained to be seen. As December deepened into winter, a truth settled over everyone affected. This was not an ending but a threshold. Harry and Meghan would define who they could become without the identity they had spent years attacking but never fully released, while the monarchy would test whether it could thrive using exile, once a relic, as a tool of modern governance. In the end, nobody truly wins when a family destroys itself, but consequences, however delayed, inevitably arrive. On December 3rd at 11:43 a.m., those consequences became undeniable. The exile of Harry and Meghan is not merely a royal drama, it is a reminder that every action has a reaction, every word carries weight, and every burned bridge may one day demand crossing again. The monarchy has spoken, Parliament has voted, and Harry and Meghan are about to discover what it truly means to be on the outside looking in.